Hey guys, it's Sean here, and the M1 Apple Silicon Macs are finally in reviewers' hands, and customers are getting them all over the place. And so far, first impressions seem to be extremely positive, which is good news. Now, in this video, I'm going to cover off a few of the questions I've been asked about whether or not people should upgrade to these, now that we're seeing the benchmarks and the actual real-world performance and not Apple's vague, wishy-washy sort of graphs that we got last week, and just kind of covering off who should be going for one of these, why you should upgrade to one, and why you should maybe wait for the next generation or just put it off completely. So just for transparency, we do not have an M1 Mac, and the reason for that, well, there's a couple actually. If we ordered one, it was going to take a couple of weeks to arrive, and we figured by the time it actually shows up, then everyone else is going to have benchmarks, and there are so many other channels out there that are doing an awesome job of showing off the benchmarks and the performance and everything else. So if you really want those nitty-gritty numbers, there's plenty of channels and hundreds of videos of those already. The other thing is, as well, is cost, and we figured we can reinvest that money into the channel in other ways as well. So they're the reasons, and just so you know, right off the bat, we don't have one. But the reason for this video is because we're getting asked so many questions, and I wanted to do something a little bit different when it comes to the M1 Macs and my thoughts on those, and that's to help you decide whether or not you should actually buy one. Because it's all well and good having all these benchmarks and performance numbers, but if you don't really know what that means for you, the viewer, or the creative out there, then you know what, it doesn't really help you out. And as a creator, and as somebody who is really starting on this YouTube journey and bringing videos to you, there's probably quite a few of you out there who are in a similar boat. So let's get started, shall we? So first things first, how do the M1 Macs perform? And from all of the benchmarks that we are seeing, they perform remarkably well. So I'm going to talk about just the base level MacBook Air. So this is Apple's entry level into their MacBooks now. And the single core performance is outperforming so many devices. It's literally destroying every single Intel Mac that you can pick up. And that is absolutely insane. And even in the multi-core performance, it is battling up there with the big boys. And something that a lot of you are asking is, do I regret purchasing this, the 16-inch MacBook Pro? And a lot of people were also asking, should you buy one? And if you've recently bought one, should you return it so you can, just exchange it for one of the M1 Macs? And at the time I was saying, no, I don't regret it at all. And yes, you should definitely go ahead with that purchase because, the M1 Macs are first gen and it's going to be entry level. And you know what? We don't know what the performance is going to be like. And yeah, a little bit of me is envious of all you people picking up your M1 Macs at the moment versus something like this, because on almost all counts, the 16-inch MacBook Pro is getting decimated by the M1 processors. But there are still reasons to have this, and still reasons to go for something like an Intel-based Mac or MacBook versus something like the M1. We're going to get into that now. So first up, what are the benefits of M1? And the big things are that the battery life claims that Apple were throwing around were real. You do get massive battery life improvements. And one of the things that a lot of people were asking and wondering about was, are we going to see a massive performance boost from Apple, or are we going to see a battery life and efficiency boost from Apple? And everyone's kind of leaning towards the battery life and efficiency because they're going with this new ARM architecture that they have in their phones and their iPads, and they're all so battery efficient that we kind of figured we'd see that instead of the performance boost. But this time around, we got both, which is absolutely incredible. But those battery life improvements make a real world difference to so many people out there. My MacBook Pro 16-inch, if I'm not near a charger, I would worry. If I had to depend on this as my go out into the field when Corona disappears, I had to depend on this for my real world activities and going out and meeting people and talking to clients and doing anything like that that took me away from a plug, I wouldn't want this as my device. First up, it's probably a little bit too big for that. It takes up the whole table if you sat in a cafe somewhere and you're meeting with people. It's just a bit of a nightmare. But the biggest problem is the battery life just wouldn't get me through a full working day, not even close. And that's very similar to a lot of Intel-based Macs. On the new M1 Macs, you will get a full day. All the reviewers are talking about how long these M1 Macs last, and they absolutely do live up to Apple's claims, and that's just incredible. If you're somebody who is working out in the field a lot, who is meeting clients, who is away from the office or a power outlet or anything like that, then these M1 Macs absolutely sound like they're for you. One of the big things I love about the iPad Pro is just how long it lasts. If I don't use it for a couple of days, I'll come back to it and it's pretty much on the same battery life. And by all reports, the M1 Macs are identical to that. So if you're the kind of person who needs to be out and about, then this is for you. But then you might be sitting there and going, well, Sean, that's all great that I can, get my battery life to last me a full day, but if it can't do anything, what's the point? And that's true, but Apple nailed it. Again, by all accounts, they have absolutely smashed the performance. The performance on that CPU that they are using is decimating my Intel-based i9 processor, and that is just makes me a little bit sad. Sad for my purchase, not obviously for future purchases, because these sound absolutely incredible. But if you are somebody who does need that power in a small, thin and light package, they're doing it. And they're not even causing you to break out into a sweat. And what I mean by that is the thermal performance. Anybody who's used a MacBook in recent years will know that the fans on this thing, or your MacBook, will just ramp up. I sometimes just open it up and load up Chrome and suddenly my fans are blaring like mad. If I export a video on this thing, the whole house knows, because these fans, it levitates half the time. It's just absolutely insane. But by all accounts, again, on the new M1 Macs, they just don't break a sweat. And even the MacBook Air, it doesn't thermal throttle until about 8 minutes into any intensive tasks, which is incredible. And that was one of the things being thrown around. MacBook Pro because it has a fan, or a MacBook Air. Well, actually, it seems as though that thermal performance doesn't really affect the M1 MacBook Air, which is incredible. So you're not going to have to worry about heat, you're not going to have to worry about efficiency, you're going to get the power and the performance and the battery life. Surely it's all good stuff. Well, no, not necessarily. So there's a few reasons why something like this is still the better bet to go for. And the first one up is the GPU, so that's the graphics performance. And ultimately, if you're doing any gaming, which you're on a Mac, so you're probably not doing much gaming, but if you are, the graphics performance is still better on something like the MacBook Pro 16-inch. Or if you have something like an iMac or a Mac Pro, well, you know what, your graphics performance is going to be better. And that really helps nail down some of the tasks like video exporting or just doing anything that's graphics intensive. It is still better on these. So yes, the MacBook Pro 16-inch or some of the other MacBook Pros or iMacs or Macs do have their drawbacks, but they still have the graphics performance. So the Apple M1 GPUs sound like they're pretty impressive for what they are, but they're still not competing with the top end stuff that you can get from Apple at the moment in terms of their Intel based products. So that is something worthwhile considering. The other thing to consider, and actually this is a bit of a double-edged sword, is the fact that there's compatibility. And I talked about this a lot in the lead up to the launch. And again, from all the reviews and everything that's coming out, is actually Apple have nailed it with Rosetta 2, which basically translates old Intel-based apps so they work and run pretty much natively on the M1 processors. They have nailed it. People are talking about the fact that a lot of these applications that haven't even been moved across onto the M1-based stuff is performing better than what it did on Intel-based stuff. And that's just mind-blowing. But at the moment, there are potentially going to be things that will crop up to absolutely blow your workflow out of the water, and not in a good way. I just need to clarify that there. So, for example, one thing that I'm seeing a lot of people say is that things like Pixelmator Pro aren't playing nice at the moment with M1 Macs. And you know what? I use that all the time for things like thumbnail creations, for my marketing, for banner creations. And if suddenly I lose out on an application like that, which might potentially be niche to a lot of people who use Photoshop or Adobe products, it throws my workflow out of sync. And if you're using this as a business device, I'm going to reiterate this, and I've said this so many times before when talking about the Apple Silicon Macs, is the fact if you are using this as a business device and a business tool, you want to hold off. Because at the end of the day, there are potentially going to be compatibility issues. It's not that well documented, and even though a lot of people are talking about how good Rosetta 2 is at translating apps that don't currently run, there's so much time for things to go wrong. We are in the very, very early days at the moment. Compatibility is going to get better and better and better. In a month, 2 months' time, we're going to have so many more apps running natively on the M1 processors, which means their performance is going to increase astronomically, and people will be able to kind of talk about what's not working for them. So if you have a specific workflow, in a couple of weeks, a month's time, you're going to be able to Google all of that and find out what works and what doesn't. And if all your apps work, perfect, then maybe this is for you. The other reason you probably don't want to jump into this just yet, and especially if you are somebody who is using this as a productivity device, you're creating a lot of media, you're doing a lot of graphics intensive work, is this is first gen stuff. And Apple have a history of just pretty much abandoning their first generation hardware relatively quickly. Just look at the original iPad. That basically got abandoned after a couple of iOS updates, versus everything else that got years and years and years of support. The Apple Watch Series 0, it didn't even get a numbered entry into the series, and ultimately that was abandoned relatively quickly. The very first iPhone, Apple have done this time and time again. They bring out new hardware to the market, they test it out, the early adopters and the beta testers, they pick it up and they have a great time, but they also have teething issues, and then actually the lifespan of their devices it isn't as long, so you'll be getting less macOS updates in the future. Granted, that might not even be the case, and Apple might support these till day dot, but at the end of the day, Apple have a history of this, they have a track record of it, we've seen it time and time again. When you are an early adopter of Apple hardware, you have to take into consideration that that early hardware is going to be worth less in terms of value if you go to trade it in the future, and it's probably going to get less software support. The other thing to consider as well is when it comes to the Macs, this is their first try of it. The MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro 13-inch and the Mac Mini are their entry-level devices, and they are awesome and killing it in terms of performance. But that just makes me salivate thinking about what is their performance-based stuff going to look like? What is their MacBook Pro 16-inch going to look like? And we probably don't have that long to wait for it. There's a 2-year transition period, which means most of the devices are going to be ported across onto Apple Silicon. And I would imagine spring we're probably going to see some more devices announced, hopefully an iMac with a redesign, and towards the end of the year potentially we'll see a MacBook Pro 16-inch. And just thinking about what they could do with an upgraded M1 processor, whether it's not an M2 processor or an M1X or whatever they're going to call it, wow, that could be something special. So if you're already excited about the performance that's coming out right now, imagine what that performance is going to look like once they've had time to iterate on it and improve it and just have more space to work with as well. So if you are a creative professional, somebody who's using it for a lot of productivity, hang fire, because there's awesome stuff coming. And also redesigned stuff. So people complaining about the bezels and the webcam, we're going to see that change in the very near future. This is early adopter hardware at the moment, and you just need to remember that. However, you know what? This is a product that will appeal to the vast majority of you viewers out there. So anybody who's already built into the Apple ecosystem and using things like Final Cut, using things like iMovie, Pages, Numbers, all of that, all of those Apple products and Apple services, well, you know what? This is going to be an absolute perfect device for you. And to be fair, most developers are on board with this, and I can't see there being any compatibility issues as we go forward. We're going to see a few things that crop up to just, blow somebody's workflow out of the water. But for the most part, developers are on board, and developers will be on board with this because it's Apple's next generation. If they don't get on with it, it's all doom and gloom. If you're somebody who uses a lot of iPhone and iPad apps, that's another thing to consider as well, because they will work on the M1 Macs. Which means if you've got a particular iPad app that you've never been able to use on a MacBook, well, now you can. It means you're not switching between different devices, which again is exceptionally handy. So if you are somebody who's already built into the Apple ecosystem, who doesn't need to rely on it completely for work or for business, then maybe this is for you. If you're doing your general browsing, I guess if you're a creator like me, for example, at the moment, somebody who's recently gotten into creating video for YouTube, creating graphics and all of that, then actually the M1 Mac is probably going to be perfect for somebody like me. So yeah, if you know what you're getting, and you know that potential software support is going to be a little bit limited and the value of your device is going to decline over time, then it's probably worthwhile going for. The battery gains, the performance improvements, the thermal improvements, all of these things make these devices absolutely killer, and I can't wait to see what Apple do next with these. Personally, at the moment, I am crazy tempted by a Mac Mini, that small little form factor. If I could have that downstairs in my office and then use my MacBook Pro 16-inch for just around the house and all of my other computing needs, I would love that setup. And the Mac Mini at the moment is just pretty much the perfect entry level for anybody who's wanting to get into the Mac ecosystem. So if you have an iPhone and an iPad and you want to see what the Mac ecosystem is all about, and you already have a monitor and keyboard and mouse setup, then the Mac Mini might be perfect for you. But then even the MacBook Air at $999 is a killer price, and the whole thing was, do you go for the Pro or the Air? And actually, for the vast majority of people going for this sort of hardware, the MacBook Air is absolutely going to nail every single one of your needs. So it's all to play for. And I would say these are pretty safe bets to go for. If you're in the market for a new Mac at the moment, then any one of the M1 devices should be great for you. If you need something that's better in terms of graphics performance, then yeah, maybe look for one of the older Intel versions. And if you absolutely need to rely on it for work, and there's something in there that could absolutely destroy you if you didn't have it as part of your workflow, then maybe stick with the old Intel offerings, at least for a couple of months whilst we find out what doesn't work on the M1 processors. But for the most part, Apple nailed it. They gave us wishy-washy charts, they made big bold claims, they made comparisons to, I don't know, it seemed like made-up products. But when they actually came to deliver, it just seemed like they were trolling us with the announcement, which is just a little bit crazy. But they nailed it. Performance, battery life, heat, everything. It's just, it's on point. You can't really go wrong. So yeah, if you're in the market for a new one, it's probably worthwhile having a look at. So I hope this video's helped. And if it has, make sure you hit that subscribe button because it really helps us to grow the channel. In terms of Apple Silicon and the M1 coverage, it's probably going to be one of the last pieces that we do on that, just because, like I said, we don't have one, so therefore we're not going to be able to do any sort of deep dives into it, any unboxings or anything like that. And we've probably said everything there that you, the audience, is going to want to hear from us. If you do want anything more from us, do let us know and we can have a look at that. Like I said, at the moment, the sort of budget side of things really needs to go back into upgrading our cameras, our audio, and our lighting as well. But if you would like us to do more gadget deep dives and actually have some hands-on experience, and you're feeling exceptionally generous, head on over to our Patreon page where you can absolutely help us to improve this channel and to bring you, the audience, all the things that you want. So thanks for watching. We'll be back again soon, and hit the like and subscribe button. Take care and stay safe. Bye.